Tonight we are going to read a book from 1854 on hypnotism. I think it's also going to talk about animal magnetism, which is a topic that I'm pretty interested to learn more about, so let's dive in. Library of Mesmerism and Psychology, embracing the most popular works on the subject, including the philosophy of mesmerism, psychology, the science of the soul, the philosophy of charming, a treatise on mental alchemy, principles of electrobiology, elements of animal magnetism, in 2 volumes. Volume 2, Philosophy of Charming, Mental Alchemy, Electrobiology, Elements of Animal Magnetism, New York, Fowlers and Wells Publishers, Clinton Hall, 131 Nassau Street, Boston 142 Washington Street, London number 142 Strand, 1854. Here's a nice picture of Chiron fascinating Aesculapius. Now then, Chiron the Centaur, a prince of Thessaly, has fascinated his pupil Aesculapius, a brother prince, for the purpose of discovering a remedy to cure the foot of Hercules, which had been wounded by a poisoned arrow. An herb was provised which saved the hero. This plant, known from the circumstances the centaur's herb, gave name to a genus, one species of which is our common blue bottle. Chiron was the great physician of his day, and derived his name from a Greek word meaning the hand, because he performed most of his cures by manipulating. His wonderful skill in horsemanship has made the poet represent him as a centaur, half man, half horse. In after times, the medical fame of Aesculapius far eclipsed that of his master Chiron, and he was early invested by the people with divine honors. His mode of practicing, called by his descendant Hippocrates the secret means of medicine, can be found detailed in the work Fascination, or the Philosophy of Charming, the principles illustrating the principles of life in connection with spirit and matter, by John B. Newman, M.D., author of various works on natural history. New York. Preface. It is related in Epimenides, one of the sages of antiquity, that he fell asleep in a cave and remained in that state some years. When he awoke, everything was altered around him, and he scarcely knew where he was. During his absence, he affirmed that he had familiar intercourse with spirits and obtained the gift of prophecy, etc. He was reported able to dismiss his soul from his body and recall it at pleasure. So high was his reputation for sanctity that during a plague in Attica, 596 BC, the Athenians sent for him to a formal lustration, in consequence of which the plague ceased. Some German students in the last century, wishing to raise the devil, carried a pan of burning charcoal into a close room, and throwing in at various prescribed substances, danced around it, chanting a magic formula. One of them fell dead, and the rest, upon seeing his fate, fled with difficulty. The incantation, they thought, had evidently been too powerful. A professor in the same university accounted for the facts by the poisonous influence of fixed air, carbonic acid gas, generated by the ignited carbon, and offered to produce the gas at pleasure. He was instantly accused from this of having intercourse with familiar spirits. Science has long since endorsed the professor's solution, and to doubt it at the present day would betray gross ignorance. Not so fortunate, however, was Epimenides, for it is only in our own times that his claims have been acknowledged, and from want of more extended information, many are even now incredulous. Increasing light will induce belief, and it is my earnest wish that the following pages may tend to that result. Man, besides soul and matter, possesses an intermediate principle, distinct from and between both, called the life of power. Or in the words of Bonnard, he is an intelligence served by organs. These organs being the servants of the life power, by which it operates upon the material world and is turn operated upon by it. Hey, it's a book about hypnotism. What do you think? A proper knowledge of the life power is a key to explain all the phenomena of fascination, and this it is the object of the present work to communicate. A very concise but perfectly clear idea of psychology is given, and on this the foundation is laid. Yes, we shall see. We're just starting. I can't wait to get to the part about animal magnetism. The Delphic priestess inhaled fixed air to act on the life power in such a manner as to cause the spiritual in the system to preponderate over the material, that she might the better give her responses. In some cases, so great was the preponderance as to cause death, the priestess sharing the fate of the German student who accomplished his desire, and by the same means. When the wished-for change is induced, new powers or instincts, previously dormant, become suddenly developed. And like the lower animals who, when sick, run and devour the herbs suited to their case, a like faculty of properly prescribing remedies is perceived. The spiritual world is often beheld, and its denizens sometimes give the sleepwalkers information of events that will shortly happen. History tells us that the coming of Cortez and his conquest of their nation had been told the Mexicans long before a Spaniard was ever heard of, and the journals of the missionaries stationed at the Pacific Isles will present similar facts. We can now see why the brazier was used in the incantation of the student, and the probability of Epimenides undergoing a change upon entering a certain cavern, likely by accident the first time, wherein fixed air was generated. His powers of curing disease, having intercourse with spirits, and predicting events are thus explained. It should be remarked here that none but those predisposed to the change can experience it. All artificial efforts to induce it, except in such, resulting in almost certain insanity or death. Like many others in my profession, I was a bitter enemy to fascination, till accidentally led to examine it, but having done so found the phenomena it presented, though new and startling, in strict accordance with the laws of life. In explaining my views I have written for the people, entirely dispensing with the technical terms except in one or two instances, that their perusal may clear up in the minds of others as many obscure mysterious points as they did in his own, and thus subserve the interests of truth, is the sincere desire of the author. Contents, Conversation 1. Charming. Popular views on fascination. Influence of the imagination. Report of Jussieu to the French Academy. Records of the existence of fascination for 3,000 years. Process of fascination. Choosing the name. Snake charming. Anecdotes. Man charming. Rationale of fascination. Nervous vapor. Charming of men. Man can fascinate man. Man can fascinate the lower animals. The lower animals can fascinate man. The lower animals can fascinate one another. Young persons sleeping with old. King David. Schoolmasters. Savage nations. Lower animals. Poetry. I think that was like a contents or something. Conversation 2. Discovery of fascination. Adam acquainted with fascination. The town of Mansol built by King Shaddai in the country of universe. Its privileges and their forfeiture. Locality of heaven. Material world contained in the spiritual. Encampment of angels. Stephen, Elisha and his servant. Idolatry. Discovery of fascination after the deluge. Worship of Satan. Heathen magi, the first fascinators, and their apotheosis. Mercury and his caduceus. Priests of India. Our Savior accused of stealing secrets from Egypt. Cases of curses. Priests of Egypt. Life principle. Matter governed by laws of its own. Vegetable kingdom. Okay, these are like tables of contents. Let me get to... Here we go. Conversation 1. Charming. Lady, my dear doctor, I can never sufficiently thank you for the relief you have afforded me by your treatment. I had been for years on the verge of the grave, and without the expectation of ever being even for one day free from pain. The first time you fascinated me, I experienced an incredible change. My pain ceased. The heart beat regularly and my appetite returned. And what is better still, my improvement has been rapid and thorough since then. I confess this freely, as it will preface what I am afraid will give you some pain. My friends attribute my recovery to imagination, and seem to think that I was not really ill but only nervous, and they suppose that a sufficient degree of irritation would make me as bad as I was at first. Doctor, they mention, no doubt, many wonderful cases of the effects of imagination on the body. Lady, yes, and some as strange as my own. The cases that had the most effect on my mind were that of Joe, the Scottish drover, who was persuaded to believe himself sick, and in consequence really became so, and would have died had not the joke been discovered to him, and that of the criminal whom the physicians pretended to bleed to death, and who actually died from the fancied loss of blood. Doctor, that imagination exercises a powerful influence upon our bodies. It is an undoubted fact, but it is equally a fact that it has full credit for all it performs. Jussieu, one of the commissioners appointed to examine this subject by the French Academy in 1784, states as the result of a series of assiduous and attentive investigations that he had observed some facts that admitted of physiological explanations, others which seemed to militate against animal magnetism, a third series of facts which he attributed to the imagination, and lastly, those which could lead to no other conclusion than that of admitting a particular agent in their production. Lady, I had no idea the subject was known as far back as 1784. I thought it a new discovery of the present day. Doctor, we have authentic records showing its existence for upward of 3,000 years. I have been examining some authorities, and if you are sufficiently interested in the matter, will take considerable pleasure in submitting the results of my labors to you, and also explaining the connection of fascination with the laws of life. What's up, bro? It's a book about hypnotism. Lady, I am very much obliged to you for the offer, and will hold you to your promise. To tell the truth, I was on the point many times of asking the same thing, for I find it to be the universal opinion of everyone I am acquainted with, that if true, it is something allied to witchcraft, and if not true, the greatest humbug of the age. And despite my own experience, I often feel very uneasy about it. Doctor, I do not wonder at your feelings, but in relation to its effect on the imagination, I would ask if you believed in fascination before I saw you. Lady, I had never heard anything about it. One day when you came in and found the medicine had, as usual, produced no effect, After some conversation on ordinary matters, you directed me to sit down and look attentively into your eyes, and at the same time taking hold of my hands. It, in a little time, a rather uneasy feeling stole over me, which soon became pleasant and exhilarating. Before long, I felt sleepy. A dreamy and triumphant sensation succeeded, and my eyelids closed without the power to open them. My pains vanished, and when you opened my eyes, I felt better than I had done for years, and to the surprise of all my acquaintances, who predicted a speedy relapse, my recovery has been rapid and permanent.
Doctor, well then, your case cannot surely be attributed to imagination.
Lady, I never thought it could, but why do you name your new science fascination? Others call it mesmerism or animal magnetism.
Doctor, you are mistaken in supposing it to be a separate science. It is only a part of medicine. And besides, the names you have mentioned, mental electricity, neurology, pathetism, psychodynamy, and many others are in turn used to signify it. The forces of life, as I shall explain in another place, brook no interference from those of chemistry or mechanics, so that such terms as magnetism and electricity are inapplicable. Mesmer did not discover anything new. Neurology treats only of the nerves. Pathetism is a term derived from the Greek meaning suffering, and psychodynamy is another word from the same language meaning the force of the soul. Now, as we have a word in our language already expressive of the power in the lower animals, I saw no necessity to add another, especially as fascination is universally acknowledged.
Lady, you surely do not mean the charming of snakes?
Doctor, you have exactly expressed my idea. For the power in man and in the lower animals is exerted through the same medium, and produces to a certain extent the same results. Do you remember any cases of the fascination of snakes?
Lady, quite a number. Professor Silliman mentions that in June 1823, he crossed the Hudson at Catskill in company with a friend, and was proceeding in a carriage by the river along the road, which is there very narrow, with the water on one side, and a steep bank covered by bushes on the other. His attention at that place was arrested by observing the number of small birds of different species flying across the road and then back again, and turning and wheeling in manifold gyrations, and with much chirping, yet making no progress from the particular place over which they fluttered. His own and his friend's curiosity was much excited, but he was soon satisfied by observing a black snake of considerable size, partly coiled and partly erect from the ground, with the appearance of a great animation, his eyes brilliant, and his tongue rapidly and incessantly brandishing. This reptile they perceived to be the cause and center of the wild motions of the birds. The excitement, however, ceased as soon as the snake, alarmed by the approach of the carriage, retired into the bushes. The birds did not escape, but alighting upon the neighboring branches, probably awaited the reappearance of their cruel tormentor and enemy. I have read of a man residing in Pennsylvania, who, returning from a ride in warm weather, espied a blackbird and a large black snake viewing the bird. The latter was describing circles gradually growing smaller around the snake and uttering cries of distress. The bird had almost reached the jaws of its enemy, when the man with his whip drove off the snake, and the bird changed his note to a song of joy. A gentleman himself told me that while traveling one day by the side of a creek, he saw a ground squirrel running to and fro between the creek and a great tree a few yards distant. The squirrel's hair looked very rough, which shows he was very much frightened, and his returns being shorter and shorter, my friend stood to observe the cause, and soon discovered the head and neck of a rattlesnake pointed directly at the squirrel through a hole of the great tree, which was hollow. The squirrel at length gave over running and laid himself quietly down, with his head close to the snake's. The snake then opened his mouth wide and took in the squirrel's head, when a cut of the whip across his neck caused him to draw in his head, which action, of course, released the squirrel, who quickly ran into the creek.
Doctor. Dr. Good mentions the curious, fascinating power the rattlesnake, in particular, has over various small animals as birds, squirrels, and leverets, which, incapable of turning off their own eyes from those of the serpent enchanter, and overpowered with terror and amazement, seem to struggle to get away, and yet progressively approach him, as though urged forward or attracted by a power superior to that of a natural instinct, till at length they enter, apparently without foreign force, into the serpent's mouth, which had all along been open to receive them, and are instantly devoured. The larger kinds of various snakes have undoubtedly a similar power. Dr. Barrow, in his travels into the interior of South America, asserts this to be a fact, well known to almost every peasant in that quarter of the world, and Valiant, in his travels into Africa, affirms that a place called Swartland, beholding a shrike in the very act of fascination by a large serpent at a distance, the fiery eyes and open mouth of which it was gradually approaching, with convulsive tremblings, and the most piteous shrieks of distress, he shot the serpent before the bird had reached it. Still, however, the bird did not fly, and on taking it up it was already dead, being killed either by fear or the fascinating influence of the serpent, although upon measuring the ground he found the space between them to be no less than 3.5 feet. There is a case, much to point, inserted in one of the early volumes of Philosophical Transactions, which states that a mouse, put by way of experiment into a cage in which a female viper was confined, appeared at first greatly agitated, and was afterwards seen to draw near the viper gradually, which continued motionless, but with fixed eyes and distended mouth, and at length entered into its jaws and was devoured.
Lady, if any of the lower animals could be fascinated by man, I should think that would be a certain proof not only of the reality of the power, but that it did not exert its influence through the imagination.
Doctor. Animals of late days have been frequently fascinated for the purposes of experiment, and a universal rigidity of the muscles, produced to such an extent as to cause them to resemble pieces of statuary, so that the animal could be taken up and its whole weight supported by one foot, and this state produced and continued at pleasure. Mr. Bruce, the great African traveller, distinctly states from minute personal observation that all the blacks in the kingdom of Sennar, whether fungi or nuba, are perfectly armed by nature against the bite of either scorpion or viper. They take the horned serpents in their hands at all times, put them into their bosoms, and throw them at one another, as children do apples or bells, during which sport the serpents are seldom irritated to bite, and when they do bite, no mischief ensues from the wound. The influence exerted upon them is so great that they are scarcely ever able to attempt any resistance, even when eaten up alive, as Bruce assures us he has seen them,
from tail to head like a carrot. He also positively affirms that they constantly stricken the moment they are laid hold of, are sometimes so exhausted by this invisible power of or fascination as to perish as effectually, though not as quickly, as though struck by lightning. I constantly observed, says he, that however lively the viper was before, upon being seized by any of these barbarians, he seemed as if taken with sickness and feebleness, frequently shut his eyes, and never turned his mouth toward the arm of the person that held him. This is like what the crocodile hunter did too, right? This power is often used by man to disarm the fury of the most enraged or vicious quadrupeds. This is peculiarly seen at times in the cases of watchdogs, over whom some housebreakers have found out the secret of exercising so seductive and quieting a power as to keep them in a profound silence when the burglary is committed. Linda Krantz of Sweden tells us that the natives of Lapland and Dalarne are in possession of this secret generally, insomuch that they can instantly disarm the most furious dog and oblige him to fly from them with all his usual signs of fear, such as dropping the tail and becoming suddenly silent. Grooms are sometimes found possessed of a similar power over horses. Mr. Townsend gives a striking anecdote to this effect in his account of James Sullivan. The man, an awkward, ignorant rustic of the lowest class, was by profession a horsebreaker, and generally nicknamed the Whisperer, from its being vulgarly supposed that he obtained his influence over unruly horses by whispering to them. The actual secret of his fascinating power, it is very likely, was unknown to himself, for it died with him, his son, who was in the same occupation, knowing nothing of it. It was well known to every one that, however unbroken or vicious a horse or even a mule might be when brought to him, in the short space of half an hour, he became altogether passive under his influence, and was not entirely a gentle and tractable, but in a very considerable degree continued so, though somewhat more submissive to himself than to others. There was a little mystery in his plan, but unquestionably no deceit. When sent for to tame an unruly horse, he ordered the stable door to be shut upon himself and the animal alone, and not to be opened until a given signal. This singular intercourse usually lasted for about half an hour. No bustle was heard, or violence seemingly had recourse to, but when the door was opened, on the proper sign being given, the horse was always seen lying down, and the fascinator by his side, playing with him familiarly as a child with a puppy. Mr. Townsend once saw his skill tried on a horse that could never be brought to stand for a smith to shoe him. The day after Sullivan's half-hour lecture, he went, not without some incredulity, to the smith's shop, with many other curious spectators, who were eye-witnesses of the complete success of his art. This, too, had been a troop horse, and it was supposed, not without reason, that after regimented discipline had failed, no other would be found availing. He observed the animal seemed afraid whenever Sullivan either spoke to it or looked at him. In common cases, the mysterious preparation of a private interview was not necessary, the animal becoming tame at once. Lady, has no person ever attempted to explain this wonderful influence? For the facts seem to have been known a considerable time. Doctor. Yes, though some have doubted the facts, for as good Dr. Good remarks in The Marvelous, it is always far more easy to doubt than to determine. By far, the best explanation, and one with which I entirely coincide, is that of Major A. Gordon of South Carolina, the rationale of which I will enter upon after a little time. In a paper of his, he attributes the fascinating power supposed to be possessed by serpents to a vapor which they secrete, and can throw around them to a certain distance at pleasure. He advances various facts in support of this opinion, and observes that the vapor produces a sickening and stupefying effect, and alludes to a Negro who, from a peculiar acuteness of smell, could discover a rattlesnake at a distance of 200 feet, when in the exercise of this power, from his smell being effected by it, and who, on following such indication, always found some animal drawn within its vortex, and struggling with its influence. Lady, does man possess the power of throwing off a similar vapor? Doctor, undoubtedly. The instruments in both are the same, and these instruments I will take occasion to describe to you, and explain their mode of operation. I should think it possible in that case for animals in some instances to fascinate man. We have well-attested instances of their doing so. I remember reading, some time since, of a man walking out in his garden, who accidentally saw a snake in the bushes, and observing the eyes gleam in a peculiar manner, watched it closely, but soon found himself unable to draw his own eyes off. The snake, it appeared to him, soon began to increase immensely in size, and assume in rapid succession a mixture of brilliant colors. He grew dizzy, and would have fallen in the direction of the snake, to which he felt himself irresistibly impelled, had not his wife come up, throwing her arms around him, dispelled the charm, thus saving him from certain destruction. There are too many of these stories to mention a tithe of them, so I will conclude with but one more that is very generally known. Two men in Maryland were walking together, when one found fault with his companion because he stopped to look at something by the roadside. Perceiving he did not heed him, he returned to draw him along, when he perceived the other's eyes were fixed upon a rattlesnake, which had its head raised and eyes glaring at him. The poor fellow was leaning toward the snake, and crying piteously, in a feeble tone, "He will bite me! He will bite me!" "Sure enough he will," said his friend. "If you do not run off, what are you staying here for?" Finding him dumb to all entreaties, he struck down the snake with a limb of a tree, and pulled his companion violently away. The man whose life was thus providentially saved found himself very sick for some hours after his enchantment. I must express my astonishment at the new light in which you have presented the whole subject to my mind. There can possibly be no cavilling at any of the positions you have assumed. I give you the result of my own conclusions, after considerable study, and from what has been shown, I think we may prove 4 things. First, that man can fascinate man. Second, that man can fascinate the lower animals. Third, that the lower animals can fascinate one another. Fourth, that the lower animals can fascinate man. Townsend remarks that if we wish to seek for a general instance of the power one human being possesses over another, with regard to the influence of fascination, we have only to look at the effects produced when young persons sleep with old. It is recorded of the psalmist King David that when he became very old, he got a young damsel to sleep with him, that from her vigorous life he might obtain a supply to lengthen out his days. Some painful instances of this kind come under his own observation. One in which the future well-being of a person very dear to him was compromised, and he was acquainted with an infirm old lady, who was so perfectly aware of the benefit she derived from sleeping with young persons, that with a sort of horrid vampirism she always obliged her maid to share the same bed with her, thus successively destroying the health of several attendants. The celebrated German physiologist Huseland has remarked the longevity of schoolmasters, and attributes it to their living so constantly amid the healthy emanations of young persons. It may be well to mention in this connection the fact that savage nations generally practice fascination. They rub or pat one another when fatigued, and it refreshes. The wife of one of the Sandwich Island missionaries, on a visit to this country some years since, exclaimed, on returning from a long and tiresome walk that had completely exhausted her strength, "If I was home, the native women, by patting me, would soon give me complete relief from this weariness, and make me feel as lively as ever." The rites and gestures of savage magicians, the medicine men of the wilds, over their patients, which so much alarm travelers, are nothing more than fascinating passes to cure disease, a method, too, that very generally succeeds. Even among animals, it has been found that the young cannot be too closely associated with the old without suffering detriment. Young horses standing in a stable beside old ones become less healthy, and in time weak and sickly. And you say these wonders can all be explained in accordance with what is already known of the laws of life? Doctor, with the utmost certainty. Lady, but do you really think it possible that I can ever understand them? I am fearful that I have not strength enough of mind to pry into such mysteries. Doctor, the subject is not difficult by any means, and a moderate degree of perseverance is only necessary to master the whole. If you like, we will spend a little time tomorrow in its examination, and in the meantime I will leave you Mrs. Abdy's lines on fascination, which prove in a pleasing enough manner that there can be some poetry in the subject. He stands before a gathered throng, strange knowledge to unfold, charming the dazzled fancy like the fairy tales of old. Yet must he brook the idle jest, the cold and doubting sneer. He hath no beaten path to tread, no practised course to steer. The wondrous science that he strives to bring to life and light is softly, faintly breaking him from the misty shades of night, and scoffing prejudice upbraids the pure and genial ray, because it doth not burst at once to bright and beaming day. He tells the healing benefits that through this power arise, how sweet and soothing sleep may seal the weary mourner's eyes, how raging madness may be checked, how sufferers may obtain the boon of deep oblivion from the keenest throbs of pain. Anon he dwells on loftier themes, and shows how mind may claim as empire independent of the still and slumbering frame, Can ye doubt the proofs, ye careless throng? Submitted to your view, can ye hold them in derision, because yet untried and new? Know that improvements ever wend a truly course on earth, a tardy course on earth, and though wisdom's mighty goddess gained perfection at her birth, her children reach by slow degrees the vigor of their prime, for the wisdom of this lower world requires the growth of time. None wish ye on the statements of a single voice to rest. The marvels ye have witnessed, ye are urged to prove and test. Survey them in their varied forms, inquire, observe, inspect, watch, meditate, compare, delay, do all things but neglect. If ye bear in mind the lessons that today ye have been taught, ye need not lack materials for intense and stirring thought. And my simple lay can little age an orator's discourse, so gifted with the energy of intellectual force. But I ask ye, if your cherished ones sharp anguish should endure, which the stated arts of medicine had in vain essayed to cure, would it not grieve ye to reflect ye might those pangs allay, but that jestingly and mockingly ye cast that means away? Mistake me not, I prize not aught, however great or wise, if held not in subjection to the God who rules the skies. To me all knowledge would be poor, all splendor would be dim, all boons unsafe, all joys untrue, unless derived from him. And if eagerly this wondrous power I witness and approve, it is because I know no bounds to heaven's amazing love, and I cannot, by the pedant rules of critic caution, scan the depths of those exhaustless gifts his mercy pours on man. Thank you for letting me read to you. Please check the description for where to buy my art and where to watch my movie, and where to send me a one-time donation, and I will see you tomorrow.